We're facing a state landscape that is intent on trying to regulate this technology in different ways, and a federal government that is moving much more slowly on that front. There are differences of opinion at the federal government. There's a number of people at the federal government who think we need federal laws to trump state laws around artificial intelligence regulation. And there are others who say we need to let states be the laboratories of democracy. It's a confusing field, and the way in which this is going to impact companies really depends on where they sit in the whole AI value chain. Are they developers? Are they deployers? Do they work with customers who are consumers, or are they other businesses? All of these things are relevant questions to how the policy landscape is going to affect their day-to-day reality.
Technology has transformed how we live, work, and connect. And behind that change are visionary people with bold ideas. Welcome to the Bridgecast, where host Scott Kinka explores hybrid work, AI, and our evolving future with tech's brightest minds. Presented by Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading tech advisory firm. Experience a better way. The Bridgepoint way.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bridgecast. I'm your host, Scott Kinka. Thrilled you're with us today. And joining me is Paul, is the Executive Vice President of Global Public Policy and Government Affairs at the Software and Information Industry Association. Paul has led public policy work across 3 presidential administrations. He's co-authored major recommendations at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. He served as a senior counsel at the Department of Defense. He stood up governance at Federal Commission on National and Public Service. This is quite a resume, Paul. Today, we will explore how companies should translate fast-moving policy into operational strategy, how to engage constructively with governments around AI and cross-border data flows, and what responsible advocacy looks like in an era where tech policy and national security intersect. What all of that really means is you have your finger on the pulse. We're trying to figure out a little bit more about what's going on. Paul, welcome to the Bridgecast.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, super excited, Paul. We always begin with, tell us a little bit about you. Where are we speaking from? Tell us about the family. Where'd you grow up? Let us know you a little bit.
So right now I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm with the Software and Information Industry Association. We are a trade association representing nearly 400 companies across the technology and information spaces. And they include some of the biggest tech companies in the world, major developers of AI models, all the way down to startups. We represent lots of companies in the education technology space and financial market information, publishers, and a range of other companies.
Got it. Makes sense. And did you grow up in DC?
So I grew up in Michigan, just outside Detroit, and I've lived basically on the East Coast ever since I left for college.
Gotcha. You like it more rough and tumble out here because you went to Harvard Law. You just stayed out, huh?
I stayed out on the East Coast, but I love the Midwest.
I love it. Well, fantastic. So you go Harvard Law, and if I have the LinkedIn profile right, pretty much, I mean, different companies started on the firm side, but it's been almost all in public policy and government facing efforts. Was that a design for you when you were in college? Like that's what you always wanted to do? Or did you just kind of land there and here you are decades later?
Not at all. It took me some time to find this space, actually. I started my career as a lawyer in private practice. I worked for over a decade, and then I went into government. But I think over that time, I realized that it was really the government-facing work that attracted me. And now I work largely in policy. I'm still a lawyer, but I don't practice law. And I like that kind of front-facing side of things a little bit more. So it just took me a little while to find my niche.
We get that story all the time. I love hearing kind of how people landed where they didn't think that they were going to land. Paul, you've got a rare mix of government, legal experience, private sector advocacy. It's quite a resume. Hit me with an early career moment that shaped how you think about or how you approach public policy today.
Yeah, certainly. When I was a lawyer in private practice back in probably 2012, 2013, I was working with a lot of tech clients on internal investigations. And at that time, the general public didn't really talk about AI, but we were actually dealing with investigations involving AI. And the one thing that really stuck out was the level of education, the need to really educate government enforcers, government lawmakers about this technology they didn't really understand. And that's something that's stuck with me because a big part of my job right now is really explaining, it's educating, it's talking about what laws might do, what regulations might do, and what's actually happening in the world, what the effects of those laws and regulations may be.
Got it. And do I think about that? I mean, my next question on here, you got to a little bit, was tell us a little bit more about the SIIA. That's the role, right? So you are an advocate on behalf of, I think you said 350 to 400 some odd technology organizations facing government effectively.
Working with government, I'll say. And by the way, there's a little bit of an echo, so if I sound strange, that's why. But we'll just keep going. It's fine. I'll try to talk past it. So we work constructively. We try to work constructively with lawmakers, policymakers at the U.S. federal level, across the U.S. states, and also internationally on issues like AI and privacy and cybersecurity, cross-border data flows, the whole range of things that affect companies that are in the business of technology or information.
The funny part, we run into this all the time. I mean, we have many guests on here who are innovators in the AI space, security space, et cetera. I'm going to guess that several of them, may also be organizations that you work with. One of the questions we run into all the time, and we rarely ask in tech whether we should, just because we can. And I read through your policy priorities. I got myself prepared for today. I think part of being an American, like part of being in this economy, is this just sort of unbridled innovation, and commercialism. At the end of the day, we're always in the can, and I think it's hard sometimes to pause and think about the should. So, is that really where you guys are? Is just kind of getting people to think that way and getting government to try to kind of catch up with what's actually happening, kind of in innovation in these organizations?
Yeah, well, there's a ton of interest around making policy, making laws that affect the tech industry. And when I talk about the tech industry, I'm talking about the broader tech industry, not just the big players, big tech, but really everyone out there. And so a part of our work really is to try to explain where innovation is today and how we can foster more innovation. But also recognizing that when we're talking with different policymakers, they may be coming from a different perspective. They may be coming from a perspective where they're very concerned about something. And so we have to try to meet them where they are.
I think a lot of our listeners are probably going, all right, what's coming down, right? So as we think about like the current legislative, regulatory and policy landscape around AI, where are we in the US right now? And what do you see kind of in the immediate horizon?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question, really. So, one thing backing up, and your audience probably all knows this, but AI is affecting every sector of society right now. And in addition to some of the big AI labs, we're also working with companies that were not traditionally technology companies, but are using AI in many different ways, right? To improve their back office functions, to streamline workflows, to make sense of information, that just a large amount of information that's out there for many different markets. And so we're working very closely at the federal level and at the state level on legislation and also other types of policies. And I think you're seeing a different approach from the federal and the state governments. Last year, there were over 1,500 bills introduced across the 50 states around artificial intelligence. Now, a couple hundred of them passed. Some of them are very significant. Some of them don't have regulatory effects, say, on companies. But we're facing a state landscape that is intent on trying to regulate this technology in different ways, and a federal government that is moving much more slowly on that front. So there are differences of opinion at the federal government. There's a number of people at the federal government who think we need federal laws to trump state laws around artificial intelligence regulation. And there are others who say we need to let states be the laboratories of democracy. So it's a confusing field. And the way in which this is going to impact companies really depends on where they sit in the whole AI value chain. Are they developers? Are they deployers? Do they work with customers who are consumers, or are they other businesses? All of these things are relevant questions to how the policy landscape is going to affect their day-to-day reality.
Yeah, and I noticed in the policy priorities that you guys have for this year, you talked quite a bit about advocating, first for federal legislation, right? I think first, to your point, to organize the states so we don't have 50 sets of rules that we have to apply. Obviously, that becomes the basis of trying to create some kind of uniform international code, which I would love to get into in a couple of minutes, but hold on that. But I mean, one of the specific things stated, I want to challenge you a little bit, is advocating that the federal government have the sole authority for model oversight. That's going to make some people uncomfortable, at least in their first read. So tell me what that actually means in your mind, federal government having sole authority for model oversight. Just walk me through that, if you would.
Absolutely. So we like to distinguish between different actors in the value chain. And there are the models, the big models that are being developed, the ChatGPT, the Gemini, the Claude. And then there are companies who are using AI in lots of different ways. We call those deployers. And there are lots of times when deployers are also developing or fine-tuning models themselves. But a lot of these models and uses really depend on those larger foundation models that are being built by the larger AI companies. And there's been a move, one of several strands of legislative activity in the states, but there's been a move to try to regulate these models, frontier models, at the state level. Last year, we saw laws enacted in California and New York. And fundamentally, what these laws seek to do is minimize the risk of a catastrophe happening because of the way the AI model is used or deployed. And this is something that we think is fundamentally the role of the federal government, because it would be incredibly complicated and resource intensive to have 50 states looking at the exact same thing. And looking at things like, what is the national security risk here? What is the risk that these models will act in ways that were not intended? What are the risks of a massive public safety event? And trying to convene the resources, the compute resources, and the expertise at each state to do this is something that is extraordinary. And it's probably not the best use of state resources, but it is something that the federal government itself can do, and something the federal government already is doing to some extent.
So really the key is regulate enough to organize up 50 states so that the companies can operate, but not so much that it infringes on First Amendment rights, that it infringes on the ability to innovate, that it somehow slows economic growth in the area.
That's exactly right. And another component of this, which is getting a lot of attention right now in Washington, is how do you draw the lines between where the federal government should step in and where state governments should step in? So when we talk about potentially 50 laws, we're talking about 50 laws on every single aspect of AI policy. And there may be other areas where it makes much more sense for the federal government to step in. But one of the challenges we've seen, and this is where I'll speak a little bit to what I hope your audience is, which are companies that are innovating in different ways. But one of the things we see is a interest in creating laws that apply across the board to AI. But if we actually look at how AI is used in the real world, the sorts of rules or guardrails we may want around how AI is used in medical devices are going to be different than how we want to establish safeguards around AI used in vehicles or AI used in consumer-oriented chatbots. So these are all different types of things. Just because they use similar technology, AI in this case, doesn't mean that we should be treating them all the same way. And this is where the insight from companies that are building models for their own uses or adapting models for their own uses is absolutely critical to guide policymakers in the right direction.
You're the director of IT or CIO of a mid-market enterprise, and you're leveraging these. You're not constructing a model, but you're leveraging the models to innovate inside your business right now. you know, I think that you're rarely thinking regulatory and policy unless you're in banking or healthcare, right? Or you're taking credit cards. Like those are the frameworks people in IT are thinking about. But outside of that, they're not really thinking about it, right? So if you're that guy or gal and you're doing some innovation for your business, what should they be thinking about policy right now to make sure that, because you made an earlier point that I thought was great. The government's moving slower than the Fed's moving slower than the states are moving slower than innovation, right? At the end of the day is where we are. What's a practical piece of advice for that IT leader who's trying to do something with these tools right now? What should they be thinking about so maybe they're not surprised later?
Any company that's using AI, there's got to be some governance mechanism. So the engineers need to be in conversation with the lawyers who are in conversation with the business people. But that's kind of the going in presumption. So what I think matters, and you want the lawyers and the policy people to provide very clear guidance to the engineers on this stuff. But the areas where I think you're going to be looking are, what kind of uses? How are we using AI? And are we using AI, first question, in any high-risk scenarios? High-risk scenarios generally include, and I'm basing this on laws that have been enacted so far, this can always change, but, are you using AI in a healthcare context? Are you using it to determine employment eligibility or access to financial services? There's a series of areas that are generally considered to be more high risk, and other uses of AI are generally considered to be lower risk. And so if you're going to be implementing additional audit practices or explainability requirements, you really want to focus on those high risk uses, because down the road, if there is any potential legal liability, that's where it's likely to be. So I would say, mapping data, mapping how you're using AI, and categorizing the types of AI systems you're using, where you're using them, and what sources of data you're using as well. If you are using data that includes personally identifiable information, there are likely to be more requirements around that, either today or after the fact if something should happen. And so doing those kind of things and working very closely with legal to conduct assessments and something like an audit is really what you should be thinking of right now.
Okay. So basically apply the same level of care to that sensitive data in AI, but you're not necessarily advocating that, at least today, we should be thinking about other data sets. In other words, we're already worried about personally identifiable information. We're already concerned about medical. We're already concerned about financial information. If you're going to touch that, apply the same level of care effectively, as, not to put words in your mouth, but feels like a practical story to give to the average IT leader.
Yeah, I think that was a great way to put it. We should switch seats because you explained that very well. So you're already taking a lot of care around certain types of data, and that's important. Keep doing that, and then on top of that, layer the AI piece. Like, where are you using AI?
No, that makes sense. I want to go a level above federal now when I think about your policies, because one thing we've talked quite a bit about on this show is, we're trying to do the right thing. And obviously that implies all the things that we just talked about in terms of securing personal information, et cetera. Obviously the idea that we're going to build a consistent framework across the states means the Fed steps in. Now you've got the next level, and this is stated in your policies, to use that to effectively try to begin to build some international standards, or a coalition of the willing, if you will, around beginning to define some standards around AI. Because this really isn't a technology that has place at the end of the day. That's what makes even the difference between the states and Fed hard to manage, right? There's no real place to this. The question that I have struggled with, and I'm sure you guys have thought about it, given that it's stated in your policy, is just around, what if we're going to regulate here in the US? I think it's a pretty good bet that the bad actors are not going to regulate, which means then we're taking all the power out of our hands and putting it in the hands of the people who are not. Like, how do you think about that? And whether that's state actors or bad actors, what have you. But if we're going to build an international coalition around how we want to build standards around AI usage, Can you define that risk a little bit for us? Like, how do you think about building a federal guide, or international guidebook that's not going to get followed by the, by the people who are ill-intentioned?
Again, I think about this at different layers of the AI stack. And if we are talking about, when we are talking about models, we want models to be reliable. We want them to be able to the greatest extent possible, do what we're asking of them. And no model is going to be perfect. And, policymakers need to understand that you can't achieve perfection. You can't prohibit a model from doing certain things unless you cut off use entirely. The major AI developers right now are already adhering to a set of best practices. We'll say, I won't use the word standards because in this area, standards often imply these international technological standards that are created by bodies like the ISO and IEC. They're very complicated. Some of your audience may be familiar with some of the cybersecurity standards coming out of NIST and some of the other bodies. And those are in the works. And so you don't see companies wanting to be completely ad hoc about everything because no one's going to use their models. If they're trying to sell to businesses need reliability. The companies we work with who are in the financial market data space, they need their models to work. Otherwise, they're going to create a whole bunch of downstream consequences and they're going to lose customers. So it doesn't make business sense. It doesn't mean we're calling for rigorous requirements, but we do need some sort of check to build public trust and ensure that the models that are out there are reliable. Now, it may very well be that models coming out of other countries are not as reliable and they aren't adhering to those standards. And, the market should be able to exclude those models that are not reliable and not use them. There's a number of challenges that we face here right now, but there is certainly pressure in other countries to try to improve the trustworthiness of the AI that is being used in those countries. And that is something that we need to tap into. So if we're talking big picture about the competitiveness of US technology versus technology from some other countries, this is something that we can rely on and we should be relying on.
Speaking of things that may come back to haunt, IT leaders, is one of the questions that I get a lot. And you made reference to it in a couple of spots in the doc that I read. Around copyright and intellectual property rights. And I think, and we talk often, AI is meant to be referential, not self-referential, but referential, meaning that everything is a derivative. And there was a specific statement I wanted to ask you about in the policies. You said effectively that the current system is well equipped to handle the challenges posed by emerging technologies, just as it has in the past. The flip side of it is, this will be, there will be precedent set around the use of, derivative works in AI multiple years
Right.
after the listeners of this show have been using models that are making derivative works, right? Like, so how do you guys think about, by the way, I agree, this isn't a disagreement. It's just a matter of like, how do we collectively maybe just breathe deeply that we're not running headlong into a copyright or IP infringement scenario just by using a public model at this point. And how do you think about that in terms of, the timing of using tools now and having precedent set, frankly, probably 2 years from now, 3 years from now, in some of these cases that are going to get brought leveraging a court-based system, to settle some of this.
I mean, that's a really good point, that it's going to take some time for the law to settle. And as you cited, we think the courts are best equipped to deal with this. We think making a change to copyright law right now in the United States would have dramatic implications, and we don't know what the effects would be. And look, I work with not only model developers, but also with publishers and publishers who have really valuable content, right, that they need to get paid in order to continue to produce. Think of publishers of scholarly journals and educational textbooks. And this is one place where everyone has kind of come together, that we really do think that the courts are best equipped to do this. And it's not a place where Congress should be acting. And when we're talking about copyright in the United States, that is law that is made at the federal level. There is preemption of state law, so the states don't enact their own copyright laws, though there are a number of states that are looking to create copyright adjacent type laws that would extend protections to things like image, name, likeness that may not be copyrightable right now. And so this is a very challenging area, and there's a political battle going on right now between the content industry, Hollywood, and some of the other parts of the economy.
Yeah, the thing that scares me, I would just say, from my seat, is just ultimately this is going to come down, in my mind, to a definition of derivative work, and what of the previous work, ultimately falls under copyright at the end of the day. I think about it. I mean, I'm in my part-time, previous full-time in my life, I was a musician, and every piece of music is a derivative of something that somebody's already heard. Nobody has an original thought at the end of the day. We're combining uniquely pieces of, things that have been created over millennia, frankly, in the human experience. But like, how do you adjudicate that at the end of the day? Now, ripping somebody's lyrics off, licking somebody's, intro off. Again, I get it. But there's a whole debate raging in the AI industry around Suno and tools of this. Like, they're producing works that sound completely different than anything else, but just having them leverage derivative works is a question mark right now. I mean, I don't know that there was so much a question in there, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts in it. That's where I'm getting nervous, because copying is one thing, but there's no question everything happening in AI is ultimately a derivative work of somebody's copyrighted content, even if it's undistinguishable at the end of the day. I think that's really where this thing's going. Personally, I think this is where it's going to come to in the U.S. courts.
I think, I think you've really hit on it, is that there's a distinction between the inputs and the outputs. And those questions are determined at the output side, and they're adjudicated because they're not easy questions. And it's hard to create one rule to rule them all. And so that's why we bring them to courts, and the court system is slow. I recognize that. But it's just a very difficult issue to deal with at a policy level.
One more question, then we'll get into some fun. I'm looking at the time on this. Where's the time going? I could talk to you for 2 hours. Just thinking as a mid-market and enterprise IT leader, we kind of bounced around the outside of this. You had a good point around governance, and that's probably your answer. But if you're a business that does not have a policy team, doesn't have a big legal department, what's just the first practical protection step that businesses should be thinking about as it relates to AI?
The very first thing, what I said before, is data mapping, AI mapping. Like, what kind of data are you using? What type of AI are you using? Make sure that you are in touch with your lawyers. Presuming there's no policy team, they should be abreast of developments. And then you're going to have to plan out how you deal with the near-term requirements. So updating terms and conditions, doing more impact assessments, looking out for different things in your audits, and how you're looking forward. And looking forward is going to depend on a number of different trends that we may see, and also the nature of the business. If you're a business that is working across borders, you need to really think about the likelihood that there's going to be more sovereign AI requirements, data localization requirements. You're going to have trouble transferring data across borders, and you need to adopt more of a modular approach to how you're providing your service to your customers.
Makes sense. What about, I'll just make a general statement. ChatGPT is the number one shadow IT application of all time, right? And so, and we're generally advising businesses on how to manage that, not to shut it down, but to use that for use case development. But it certainly creates exposure at the end of the day. Is a good just AI governance policy that's attached to sort of the acceptable technology use policy inside of a business generally, obviously I think we would agree that it's important, but is that enough to cover most businesses in terms of rogue use of AI inside of the business?
Oh, good question. So we're talking about use in the business. I mean, I think it's from an IT perspective, you have to make sure that you're using an enterprise version of ChatGPT or whatever it may be, that your data, your queries, anything you put into the system is not being shared, does not become part of the training corpus. So maintaining the privacy of your trade secrets, your proprietary information is number one. And I think training people too. And this is partly IT, but it also goes beyond that. And we're going to see AI help people in so many different ways, workflows, and we need to make sure that people understand how to get the most out of that. And it's not going to be intuitive for everybody.
I could continue. I mean, we're 30 minutes in, so I'm going to get to the fun, but this was interesting. I would love to have you back at some point in the future because I have about 2 more hours worth of questions. We could keep going. Oh, but let's jump to some fun with the time that we have left. I'd love you to give me, maybe this one isn't as much fun. Give me one, maybe policy surprise or something that happens in the industry that you maybe expect to happen in the next 12 months that IT leaders are not planning for?
Oh, that's a good question. So what IT leaders are not planning for. So I think that these are probably going to have a downstream impact on IT leaders. I would say there is a huge push right now around AI infrastructure and data centers. And so I think you're going to see more federal action focused on that, trying to rein in states by focusing on data center licensing and making sure that we can actually build out. I think that is also going to drive a lot of international AI policy as well. AI, I believe, will be a hot issue in the midterm elections, and it's not an issue that it's going to align cleanly with Democrats or Republicans. It's going to create alliances that are unusual, and how that plays out is not really clear. But I think it's going to become increasingly newsworthy, as if AI isn't already very newsworthy. And from an IT perspective, I would say, just not to talk over you, but I think in cybersecurity, I think people are really becoming attuned to the cyber risks that AI can pose. And that is something that's going to affect IT leaders for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I love your take on that it's going to become part of the election, but it's not going to go along party lines. I mean, particularly if you just we've been talking about policy and use. You just brought up a whole other animal, which is the capacity and, more importantly, the power that's required in these data centers. You know, it's one of the things that we at Bridgepoint, we do for a living is help these companies find data centers right now where there's enough power and enough space to be able to actually stand these models up, stand these products up. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things where tech, infrastructure, you know, the whole green crowd, like everybody's going to kind of be smashing in the middle of this. And it's not just around AI use, right? It's how to power and locate it at the end of the day. That's a super interesting one. Let's be controversial. Give me a contrarian view that you hold around AI policy that maybe your peers or some of the folks in your industry might go, I can't believe that he just said that.
That's good. I think so. The debate is often debate here, at least, is often positioned as there's 2 camps. There's the doomers and the boomers. But maybe it's not contrarian. I actually think where industry is largely is in the middle. Like industry recognizes that we need to be promoting innovation as much as possible. But innovation has to be responsible. And I really think that's where we are. And I think that doesn't come out enough in the debates we're part of.
Is there a governmental responsibility to help businesses define what responsible AI actually is? I love the word responsible. This was not in my questions, but it just popped off because we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. Is there a government responsibility? Not really. But the government is a great convener. And over the past 4 or 5 years, there's really been a convergence on a lot of non-legislative best practices. And I think that is really the area that is going to grow a lot more. And that's what we're working on. You know, industry standards, industry leading. We want US industry to be seen as the best out there. There's a lot of competition. And the products are really, they're really good. People are addressing concerns that they hear from the public.
Amazing. All right, 2 last, and then we're going to get you off here. I'll get to the rest of your day going. Tell me one book, podcast, something that's shaping your thinking right now.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So when I read novels, and they're not always science fiction. I need to get my mind off because I read the news, the tech policy news all the day. But there are blogs that I follow pretty religiously. Tech Dirt, Lawfare. These are great blogs. Tech Policy Press. and it gives me a good pulse on what's happening in the community.
Do you care to share a novel you're reading right now for our audience? Is there anything interesting?
Just finished a book called Euphoria by Lily King.
Based off of the television show or something completely different?
I think it has absolutely nothing to do with the television show, which I have not seen. It takes place mostly in the 1930s in New Guinea, but it's extraordinary writing. It's about human relationships, love.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to check that out. Now, my last one. We ask every guest this question, and you wouldn't believe some of the answers we've gotten. We reach some dystopian future, whatever science fiction you follow, you can choose which dystopian future that is. But you are left with a phone that has only one app still working on it. What might that app be if you had your choice?
Google Maps.
Okay. You want to know where to go. I got it.
I want to know where to go. I rely on it probably more than anything else.
Fantastic. I love that. I guess getting around DC isn't exactly easy, so that's part of it, right? Yeah, it's we've gotten plenty. I always harken back to, usually people go to their entertainment because they're like, if I'm by myself, potentially I need my entertainment. Or they're like flashlight, because I have no idea what the situation is right now. Paul, for listeners who want to follow your work, access the association resources, like where can they go to find out a little bit more about the work that you're doing?
Great. Our website, SIIA.net, NET, is a great place to go. And we're also on Twitter, LinkedIn. I think we're SIIA or SIIA policy.
I love that. And I highly recommend, by the way, I mean, maybe you wouldn't love this, but I downloaded this yesterday and read it. I thought it was great. It gave great perspective, at least a framework. This is the 26 policy priorities that you guys published. It's right on the website. You can download the PDF. Super helpful to get some thinking around it. So there's a recommendation there. I'll leave you with just one. If you could leave tech and business leaders with one sentence, just one, about operating effectively in a fast-changing technology and policy environment, what would that be?
Let's try to leave the politics aside and get practical policy done.
Got it.
Ideally, the politics are always in the way of good policy, but that's how the city works. So
policy, well, I was just going to say policy trumps politics, but that word's charged these days. Let's just say policy over politics. How's that? I love it. Paul, thanks for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on, Scott.
Absolutely. And that is a wrap on this episode of the Bridgecast. If you found today's conversation insightful, if it gave you something to think about, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, share it with your team, and we'll be excited to catch you on another episode of the Bridgecast. Thanks a lot for joining us. Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.